I'm Steve Liebman. In the late 1980s, two murders of a vastly different nature attracted immense attention. A cloud of suspicion hangs over Sydney's gay community as a multi-millionaire bathhouse and bar owner dies in mysterious circumstances. Then his lover, the man who inherited his empire, is killed. There are many who stand to benefit from the killings, but who has the most to gain from murder? First, though, Australian boxing's royal family is torn apart as a domineering father brutalises his sons and even drives one of them, a national champion, to commit the ultimate crime.
Bit quicker, left, right, to the body.
This cocky bantamweight is Cec Waters. He's father to 3 champion boxers.
Come on, come on! On the retreat, fight!
But nothing the boys face in the ring is as brutal or unforgiving as Cec Waters himself. He drives his sons relentlessly. He dominates and rages at them until they have no will of their own, as the oldest son, Dean, remembers.
First of all, the shouting, the screaming, and just the absolute rage, you know, like veins would pop in his neck and his face would just become almost purple, just with sheer rage and anger, and he'd sometimes froth at the mouth.
It's the uncontrolled rage of his father that will drive Dean Waters to a crime that will haunt him for the rest of his life. It's 1988. On the New South Wales Central Coast, Alan Hall, a local horsebreaker, is found lying in a pool of blood. He's been ambushed and killed by 2 gunmen. Hall, a petty criminal, has a reputation for not repaying debts, and he's been charged with homosexual assault and drug dealing. Rumours suggest he destroyed a handicapped man's marriage by having an affair with his wife. Months before Hall was killed, police received an unsigned letter alleging he was drugged to the eyeballs and firing a rifle he didn't have a licence for.
I was aware of Alan Hall. I had been involved in a matter prior to the murder, in actual fact. It was a minor drug matter.
After having his house allegedly shot at and then burgled, a more ominous threat follows in February 1988, when Hall's home is torched by arsonists. 4 months later, on June 29th, Hall and his girlfriend Christine, who happens to be Cec Waters' wife, settle in to watch television when they're disturbed by their dogs barking wildly. Hall goes outside to investigate. He sees nothing out of the ordinary.
Hey, Danny, dog, what's the matter with you?
So he cracks his stock whip to silence the animals. A split second later, 3 shotgun blasts ring out. He's killed instantly. Within 4 hours of Hall's death, police are swarming over the Kulnura property owned by Cec. They're aware of problems between Cec, his wife Christine, and her lover, the dead man, Alan Hall.
Christine Waters, the estranged wife of Cec Waters, and Dean's stepmother, had complained to police about harassment by Cec Waters and by other members of the family.
Cec has encouraged Hall and Christine to enter into a sexual relationship. He's shocked and enraged when they fall in love and move in together. Waters demands blood.
He wanted them to have sex. That was his thing. He wanted them to have sex, and he wanted to watch and then join in, and it was that threesome thing, you know. And when he lost control of the situation, when he lost control of his being able to manipulate my mum to do whatever he wanted, or Alan, he turned nasty. And especially, I think, was that my mum was actually starting to show feelings for this guy, you know, in a romantic way, which didn't sit too well with my dad.
The coming together of Alan Hall, Cec and Christine in itself was bizarre, where Cec had a number of dogs, a large number of dogs up there, but he also had a number of horses. and those horses were unbroken. And he engaged Alan Hall to break in those horses. Alan Hall did that. Cec didn't have the money to pay him and offered Alan Hall his wife in lieu of payment. Now, that's a bizarre scenario, but that did in fact happen. And of course, Christine and Alan fell in love. Alan showed Christine affection that Cec had never showed her. And she ran away with Alan Hall. And of course, Cec then became the aggrieved husband.
The Waters link to the murder sparks a media frenzy. Cec and his sons Dean, Troy and Guy are regarded as the royal family of Australian boxing. The press knows Cec as an eccentric Englishman who left the UK in the 70s to raise his children in the Australian bush, far away from what he calls the temptations of the concrete jungle.
I don't smoke and don't drink, so straight away there's a clash of personalities. Then when I start bringing in some of the other things, well, it just doesn't do. And they say to themselves, this bloke's some kind of a weirdo. Some kind of a weirdo, you know?
But no outsider knows the skeletons in his closet. Having served time in England's toughest jails, Cec Waters knows the trouble young men can get into. He believes that, like lions, children need to be tamed, and he boasts that if tamed properly, they'll even kill for you. His family, Christine, the boys and a daughter, Tracy, live in constant terror of his violent rages.
He was quite a brutal man, and I don't believe that Cec had any of the normal human traits of love and affection, that type of thing, those feelings. I think to Cec that was a sign of weakness, and he treated people that showed those type of feelings with disdain, with contempt, and that's how he treated his family.
The son of a wife-beating alcoholic, Cec Waters grew up in the slums of North England. To say he had a colourful background would be an understatement. While he threatened to kill his children if they turned out gay, he indulged in homosexual affairs during a stint in prison. He played bit-part roles in crime movies. He forced his kids to accompany him on holidays to nudist camps. He was, wrongly, accused of murdering his third wife. His fifth wife, Christine, was forced to work as a prostitute to bankroll his dream of raising 3 world champion boxers. He bragged about knowing Britain's most notorious criminals and imposed a demented godlike control over his family.
I'm supposed to be some kind of a lunatic. I don't think so. I think I'm some kind of a very, very shrewd parent.
We had to pee in a bucket in the middle of the room. He would always he wouldn't allow us to go and use the toilet at night. So we had this bucket in the middle of the lounge room, and we would have to, if we got up, we'd have to go and wee in this bucket. And there were times when he would be there and he would hold my penis while I was weeing into the bucket, and I used to feel very, very inferior and just like yucky. I just didn't want him to touch me.
We had no money and we had no job, but we still gave it a go.
But strangers never see that side of Cec Waters. Indeed, he trains his children to hide the truth about his evil nature by making them rehearse answers to questions the media might ask about their relationship. Waters further dehumanises his family by allowing a pack of mangy dogs and cats to live in their ramshackle farmhouse.
Feces and mess and filth everywhere continuously, and yet we had to live like that, you know. And how do young men, you know, allow that? Well, you know, for us there was no choice in it. You know, I may have been 24 going on 25, still living at home and living under these filthy conditions because we were controlled. The last beating I actually received from my father was when I was 25, and actually at the time I was a professional heavyweight boxing champion of Australia, you know, and I was getting a beating from a guy that was probably up to my my neckline. But that was the kind of hold my father had over me and my brothers.
Yet Dean always strives to live up to the expectations that make him his father's special boy.
I was always my dad's favourite, you know, like he would always tell me that I was his special boy, you know. He always made me feel like, you know, he loved me more than anyone else, you know. And that meant a lot to me, you know. My father was my world.
Little could Dean Waters have ever realised his status as Cec's favourite son will mean that he must one day prepare to murder his mother and her lover.
In the boxing ring, Dean Waters and his brothers are being lauded as potential world champions, and they experience a rare adulation.
You box your fight today better than you've ever boxed a fight before.
But on their farm at Kulnura, the arrival of Alan Hall upsets Cec's balance of power, and the charade that they are the perfect family is about to be shattered.
He felt that because my mum had left him and she was living with another fella, that it was going to damage our great boxing name in this country and hurt our marketability.
You're weak! You're pansy! You're a pansy!
So he had a big problem with that, and what would happen is continually when I came up for training, there would be this bombardment over months and months that something had to be done.
I want it real deep.
Dean becomes Cec's messenger boy, running threats of serious reprimands to Christine if she doesn't return. However, Dean only realises the gravity of Cec's plan
Get your back into it, boy.
when he's made to dig two graves, one for Christine and one for Hall, deep in the bush.
I kept thinking, God, I can't do this. And I've actually voiced that, and I said, look, isn't there any other way? Can't we do this another way? And again, he just tore into me and started to abuse me, told me that I was yellow and I was a coward and I was no good.
Cec also targets Dean's best friend, 25-year-old mechanic Damon Cooper, to help fulfill his murderous plan.
Go on, some more.
After relentless badgering, which borders on brainwashing, Damon Cooper surrenders to Cec and helps Dean to burn down Hall's house. There's no escape from Cec's desire. Dean's been trained since birth to be the loyal soldier, and Damon isn't mentally strong enough to resist the order to kill the lovers. And so, on the night of June 29th, 1988, the two men embark on their murderous mission.
So yeah, we climbed through the fence, walked up the drive and just positioned ourselves on the side of the drive, and after a short time, Alan came out to see why the dogs were barking. He went back, and then it was during that time that he'd gone back that Damon had actually lost his nerve.
Damon, what are you doing?
I just reassured him and explained to them that we had to do this. It's what my dad wanted, you know. And I mean, I wish I could have just walked away with him, you know, but for me there wasn't an option, you know. It's easy to look back now and go, but yeah, there was. You could have just walked away. It just wasn't like that. It just wasn't that easy. I ended up throwing a bucket, I do believe. Got the dogs barking. Then Alan's walked back out, and I heard what sounded like a gun going off. It was actually, I found out later, it was Alan cracking the bullwhip to stop the dogs from barking. And it was during that time when he was standing there, I can just remember seeing his silhouette. I just pointed the gun towards him, and yeah, I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. I've jumped up and I've shot 2 more times, even though he'd already hit the ground. You know, he wasn't there, but it was just reflex action. As I turned and started to run, after firing the 3rd shot, I heard Damon discharge his rifle.
While Cec makes it clear he wants Christine killed, Dean decides the demand to murder the woman he's loved as his mother is impossible to carry out.
And it was only on the actual night that I convinced myself that I couldn't do it. You know, I was trying to work a way out of this. The magnitude of this thing was just too big for me. You know, like I couldn't get around it. And probably half an hour before the shooting actually happened, I decided I can't hurt my mum. I can't hurt her. And I remember thinking, I hope my dad's going to be okay with that.
With Hall dead, Dean and Damon run off in blind panic. They throw dirt from another location over their car's carpet to cover their tracks in case the police examine the vehicle. Within hours of the ambush, police raid Cec's farm and the house Dean had recently moved into.
They've come to the door, knocked on the door. I mean, I was still awake. I couldn't sleep. I was just laying in the bed, and I was just, you know, every time I closed my eyes, I could see the silhouette of Alan. I was just trying to come to terms with the gravity of the crime I just committed.
Dean, where have you been tonight?
I've been here all night.
After the police enter Dean's house, he sees something that makes his blood run cold.
As I walked in the house and I looked into the bathroom, I could see the bathroom door was ajar. And there were the boots that I'd worn with the mud all over them, and the clothes with residue from the gun blast. And I've seen them, and I've just, I mean, I was already paralysed from what I'd done. Now these officers have come into my home. I'm going to jail there. It's all over, you know. I'm looking at 20 years.
Explain this. What's this all about?
That's just a video I've been meaning to watch.
Something distracted them. On my sideboard, I had a piece of paper, and written on the piece of paper was A Time to Kill, which was actually a movie I was told to get out. And they picked it up, and it just distracted them enough to wonder what all this was about, considering what had just happened. And it gave me enough time to just walk past the bathroom, just close the bathroom, and then I've gotten dressed and I've gone down to the police station to make a report. So I don't know what you call that, whether you call it luck or blessing or what, but you know, it was over the very first night, but it wasn't to be.
Earlier that night, the gun had been hidden on the property belonging to Damon Cooper's parents before eventually being dumped in the Wyong River. After being interrogated, Dean disposes of the telltale shoes and clothes.
Police later discover that, like Dean, Cec comes very close to being caught that night, but his criminal cunning saves him.
Cec, we've got a warrant to search the house. Do you mind if we have a look through?
Yeah, off you go. On you go.
Whilst the police were executing the search warrant and searching the premises, Cec looked down and he saw a .22 calibre cartridge, a spent case, that was lying on the floor. Cec picked it up and put it in his mouth, and he had it under his tongue whilst he actually spoke to the police.
You sure no one's been with you?
Look, I've been here all night.
And in his haste to pick it up, he picked up not only the spent cartridge, but quite a bit of dog excrement that was on the lounge room floor. And of course that went into his mouth along with the spent cartridge.
When Dean meets Cec the following day, there's no pat on the back.
Why is it you can't do everything right? You was told, kill Alan, kill Christine.
And I remember when I went up to training in the morning, that morning, that he berated me and he was very angry that Christine was still alive. And the thing that really, I guess, I mean, I was already empty, I was lost. Truthfully, I was a dead man walking. I was just so empty inside. But when he said to me that I should have killed Christine as well, and then he said, then you should have actually come outside and shot Damon.
You should have killed Damon.
I can't explain what it did to me, you know, like, I don't know how I could have thought that by doing this terrible thing, that somehow everything was going to be better, that our life was going to suddenly work out.
You can't do anything right. You're just useless.
Troy Waters is preparing for his IBF world title shot with Italy's Gianfranco Rossi when police arrest Cec and Dean for the murder of Alan Hall.
While it's an ill-fated campaign with Rossi winning on points, Troy receives a massive boost as he prepares to fly to Europe when the judge dismisses the charges at the committal hearing because of insufficient evidence.
I feel we've been vindicated, and there's a big story to tell at some time in the future of intrigue and conspiracy, but that's another story.
While Dean celebrates his freedom outside the courthouse, it does nothing to ease his conscience when he's alone at night.
But there was an innocence that died. Something was different, and I honestly, I remember it, and I'll never forget it, that something died inside me, something changed. You know, like I'd taken a life, and I knew I could never give it back. And I struggled with that for many, many years, and it almost pushed me to suicide, you know, because I couldn't deal with it.
Dean may have refused to tell the police anything, but he makes a late-night confession to a local religious minister on Terrigal Beach.
Dean just opened up. He just poured his heart out. He just talked me through the whole deal. And afterwards, I spoke to him about the importance, if he ever was going to have a clear conscience, that he had to go forward. He had to come forward to the police and ultimately tell the police.
As Cec continues to plot world title fights for Troy and Guy, Dean is drowning in a sea of despair. While he initially seeks refuge in Christianity, it's easier to move to Melbourne and lose himself in the city's crime and drug scene.
It was a horrible lifestyle, but it was a place where I felt I fitted in because they were all doing the wrong thing. I was struggling. We're all running away from different things, you know, and using the drugs and the alcohol just to mask, you know, our feelings.
Dean's fear the police will reopen the case is realised about 5 years after Detective Dennis O'Toole confronts him. O'Toole knows a confession is the only way Hall's murder can ever be solved.
And I asked him whether he, in fact, had committed the murder of Alan Hall. And at that point, Dean, who was quite confident and brash, looked away and he couldn't look at me with the answer. And in fact, he didn't answer, he shrugged.
After 2 hellish years of fighting suicidal thoughts and dealing with hardened crims, Dean Waters, now facing the responsibility of fatherhood himself, returns home to the Central Coast, bloated and emotionally spent.
But now there was this little niggling inside telling me that I needed to confess this. If I really wanted to clean my life up, I couldn't sweep that under the carpet and start life now. I had to actually go back and deal with that. And that was a horrifying thought, just because, you know, there was just so much I knew that I had to come out and be told. And I guess I feared my children finding out all this stuff, and I was worried about the effect it was going to have on them.
Pastor Kevin Brett puts Dean in touch with Manny Konditsis, a local solicitor. It's another 12 months before Konditsis receives the green light to arrange a meeting with O'Toole.
He didn't mention the name at that stage, but he said, "Do you know who I'm talking about?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And we met the following day and in the solicitor's office, and walked in. And at that time, Dean indicated that he wanted to get this matter off his chest.
When I was asked by Detective O'Toole if I'd actually done the shooting, if I'd killed Alan Hall, I just remember it wouldn't come out because I'd lied for so long, and I just convinced myself that that was the way to deal with it, was to lie, 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 lie. It actually didn't come out straight away. But once I got it out, I said it again, and then it was all right.
On learning of Dean's confession, Damon Cooper turns himself in. Cec is taken into custody during a trip to Wyong. His attitude is in stark contrast to Dean's.
I think he was just in total denial. There was very little reaction from him at all. He was totally uncooperative. and quite aggressive in his own manner, I suppose I could describe.
Cooper is the first to stand trial. His legal representative doesn't argue for him to be acquitted on the grounds of not acting of his own free will. Their best result, based on the evidence, is manslaughter, and that's what they receive, 18 years with a minimum 12. A subsequent appeal and plea to the governor for clemency fails.
Not long after Dean's confession, Cec Waters, now aged 70, dies of a heart attack. At Dean's trial, 3 psychologists, including the Crown's, say that Dean was suffering from an abnormality of the mind when he killed Hall. Armed with that, Conditsis moves for Dean to be tried for manslaughter, citing he wasn't acting of his own free will. The DPP insists Waters will face a murder charge. The court is bombarded with stories of the horrific upbringing Dean endured. Members of the jury openly cry when they hear the Waters children recount their childhood.
Absolutely horrific. Allowing them to go to bed at night after he's chastised them, and then waking them up at 3 o'clock in the morning after they're in deep sleep and giving them a beating.
While Dean is braced for a severe sentence, Conditsis senses that Dean might be acquitted, yet he doesn't dare build up his client's hopes.
Dean left his keys to his house at home, believing he wouldn't need the keys because he wasn't returning home. He was going to go to jail. And that's how I wanted him to think. I wanted him to expect that the best result we could get here would be manslaughter.
The jury needs a mere 40 minutes to acquit Waters of all charges, and pandemonium breaks out.
Dean, almost in disbelief, sobbed and said thank you to the jury, and there were members of the jury that were crying as the verdict was delivered.
When the jury came back with their verdict of not guilty with Dean Waters, my reaction was probably, I was stunned. It took some time to comprehend.
Dean Waters appreciates some people can't understand he's walking free, while Damon Cooper languishes in a cell.
Are you shocked? I'm shattered. I'm shattered for my friend. You know, he'll be shattered when he hears this.
But it is pretty difficult to accept that the person who actually caused the death of another person walks free, while his accomplice, who didn't cause any damage to the deceased at all, gets 16 years jail. Even today, I find that a little bit difficult.
I can understand why the average person in the street thinks, well, look, how could this man have been acquitted? He's admitted to doing the shooting, lying there in wait and shooting a person. I entirely understand that. However, what was left to the jury was for the jury to determine whether at the time of pulling the trigger, Dean was acting out his own will or whether he was acting out the will of the father.
Dean Waters killed in the name of his father, and as he attempts to rebuild his life, it's clear many scars remain.
Life's tough, you know, it has its moments, but I'm grateful that, you know, I've got my boys, you know, like, it can always be worse, can't it? You know, like, I mean, I'm healthy, you know, I've got my freedom, you know, and I've got my boys. At the moment, I'm just working through finishing my mechanic ticket.
The boys have grown up to be gentlemen, if I might say, notwithstanding that one has been charged with murder. But how they survived their lifestyle is very hard to believe.
But the one thing I am sure of, that they will be able to face life and cope with it. And I'm not scared of that, because I've ruled them with a rod of iron, and I know every one of my children will thank me for it, and do thank me.
This is the wealthy inner eastern Sydney suburb of Paddington. Here, in 1990, a rich, flamboyant businessman suffering from a range of AIDS-related diseases dies suddenly and suspiciously. He is Roger Claude Tessedra, and he's made millions from a chain of homosexual bars and bathhouses giant cash businesses set up around Sydney's Oxford Street when gay liberation exploded back in the 1970s. He's promised publicly and often to leave a string of friends and former lovers large slices of his fortune. But after his death, a surprise new will is produced, leaving the bulk of his estate to his last lover, Ludwig Gertsch. But it's not long before Ludwig himself is found dead, brutally murdered.
This is the dark side of Sydney's gay underworld, a true story of money, greed, lust, revenge and murder, the sinister inheritance hidden in the will of death. The events leading to the sudden and mysterious death of gay millionaire Roger Claude Tessèdre and the brutal murder of his last lover Ludwig Gertsch stretch back to Sydney in the early 1950s. It's a time of rigid and conservative laws and social values. To be homosexual at this time is to be forced to live a lie. Gay club owner Rod Stringer remembers that even gay men attending private parties were harassed.
Quite often, there'd be a knock on the door and it'd be the police that'd be raiding the parties and things like that because they thought there was some untoward sexual activity going on in these private parties and things. But that was all through that late 50s, early 60s era.
Into this rigid and dangerous world comes Roger Claude Tessèdre, a handsome, gay and lusty young Frenchman. He's been raised in the brothels of Paris during World War II, and he knows what it is to be dirt poor and hungry. In Sydney's bohemian King's Cross, he sets up business as a florist and later a hairdresser, quickly learning how to tickle the till, slipping petty cash into his pockets and avoiding taxes. But the real money starts flowing when he becomes a pioneering restaurateur where his natural charm and skill make him the perfect maitre d'.
Well, I think he was a well-dressed, so certainly a good-looking sort of a man, and he always had sort of very attractive companions and things like that. Didn't have any problems of having, one of them attractive people on his arm around town.
Roger Claude's restaurants are the talk of the town as he entertains the rich and famous, including international show business celebrities, at places like the Plaka and Le Cabanon. Oxford Street identity Craig Petrie remembers his style and generosity.
Oh, Roger was fantastic. A wonderful, wonderful maitre d'. Always made you feel welcome, always gave you that free glass of wine, always... Nothing was a problem. His staff were the same.
By the 1970s, Roger Claude has become a key member of a group of tough inner-city business and property tycoons. Defying restrictive licensing laws and corrupt police, they operate a chain of bars, lavish nightclubs, discos and bathhouses, Capriccios, 253, Jules and Patches. Most profitable of all are the gay bathhouses with their stream of customers around the clock and their low costs.
In a steam bath can run with a staff of 2 people. You can get 100, 200, 300 people a day go in there. It's sort of $5 or $10 a person. So they could be turning over $2,000 or $3,000 a day, with a very minimum staff.
The King's Steam Bathhouse is the jewel in Roger Claude's business empire. Roger Claude skims thousands of dollars from its cash registers and travels the world, buying antiques and paintings, which he uses to turn an old house in Paddington into a palace. By the early 1980s, he's also riding the wave of sexual liberation that turned Sydney into the gay capital of the South Pacific. In 1981, he meets Ludwig Gertsch, a 35-year-old Dutchman who becomes his last great love. Gertsch is a poor hairdresser from the wrong side of town, and many of Roger Claude's close friends and potential benefactors believe he's a consummate gold digger. Author Sandra Harvey investigated Ludwig's life.
He was a complex character in a way. He was opportunistic. He came from a very poor background, and I think when he met Roger, he realised he was on a good thing. I think Roger was a difficult man to have been with, from all accounts. He tried to emulate Roger in many ways, and he didn't have the charisma or the business nous or the chutzpah that Roger Claude had. So he was sort of like a bit of a sad figure in that regard.
Hi there, how you doing?
Others, like barman Justin Brash, have their suspicions about the new man, but are more philosophical.
Ludwig had sort of been around in the background for a long time, socially, but it was a big surprise when they got together. Ludwig was funny, you know. He was a bit creepy, I always thought, but Roger fell head over heels for him.
The relationship with Ludwig becomes even closer when a blood test in 1985 reveals Roger Claude has been infected with HIV, the human immunodeficiency virus that's sweeping through gay communities around the world. At this time, there are no effective treatments, and gay men are dying in their thousands. By 1988, he begins to suffer from a range of illnesses and decides to make out his will, in which he names Ludwig as the main beneficiary. But significantly, he also lists large bequests to his closest friends and former lovers. After that first will is written, his lawyer of many years decides to retire, and Roger Claude appoints a new solicitor to handle his affairs. The new lawyer is Brian Roberts, and he will become a key player in the drama that's now unfolding.
Sweetheart, our friends are leaving. They've come to say goodnight to you.
As Roger Claude grows sicker, he tells his closest friends repeatedly and publicly exactly what he's leaving them in his will. Top of the list is a handsome former lover, Eduardo Elderici, who's also infected with HIV and living in a weekender house owned by Roger Claude in the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney. Eduardo is promised use of the house for the rest of his life and a bequest of $200,000. To avoid leaving them any tax problems, Roger Claude also makes a black will, a secret list of who will get to share his many antiques, paintings, and other personal treasures worth several $1 million. He gives this black will treasure list to Ludwig.
I will. I'll put it in a very safe place. Open up.
Throughout his illness, Ludwig stays close by, taking more and more control of his life, caring for his every need and administering his medications.
In March 1990, Roger Claude asks his new solicitor, Brian Roberts, to draw up a new will. What actually happens next, however, is disputed, and one question remains to this day. Did this vital document, allocating millions of dollars, also carry with it a death sentence for both Roger Claude Teixeira and Ludwig Gertsch?
In March 1990, millionaire gay businessman Roger Claude Teixeira, suffering from full-blown AIDS, decides to have a new will drawn up. He gives the job to his new solicitor, Brian Roberts, who brings copies of the new document to his Paddington mansion. Several neighbours are called to witness as he signs. The neighbours allege they're not shown the whole will, just the signature page at the end. One of the neighbours says she remembers joking, "What am I signing here? My death sentence." And Roger Claude explains that it's his new will, but they're just witnessing his signature, not the actual contents and details. This version of events is repeated by one of the people who later investigated the will, Sydney lawyer Victor Bizanis.
They were told they were there to witness a will. Teixeira made a big flourish, signed it, and then Roberts walked over, invited them to sign it, but said because there were personal things in it, he didn't want them to see it. So he covered it over with a sheet of paper. The will that itself was not a forgery, but it was doctored because later forensic investigation found that the middle bit, where all the beneficiaries were named, etc., were out of line with the paragraphs, which suggested that they were inserted later.
Brian Roberts apparently hands a copy of the new will to Roger Claude and supposedly keeps the original.
And... Hello?
Still, Ludwig remains in control. He answers the incoming phone calls and angers Roger Claude's friends when he discourages them from visiting, saying his lover is asleep or too ill to see anyone.
Thanks for your call.
A close friend of Ludwig, who doesn't want to be identified, says it was Roger Claude's wish that Ludwig act as a gatekeeper.
Ludwig would screen the calls on his behalf, and a lot of people actually pointed the finger at Ludwig later on, saying that he had cut off a lot of people from Roger towards the end. But it wasn't the case. It was actually Roger's choice. He asked Ludwig to do so, and I know because I was there when he did.
When several friends do manage to visit him, Roger Claude tells them about their bequests in his will and also tries to show them the Black Will treasure list.
I can't find it, sweetheart.
But each time, Ludwig claims it can't be found.
Okay.
The existence and contents of the Black Will are becoming more public, and Ludwig is noticeably nervous and unhappy. At dinner on Easter Sunday night, guests notice the relationship is frostier than ever. Roger Claude, now easily fatigued, retires early. When the meal finishes, they call into his bedroom to say goodnight. As usual, the bed and the bedroom are a mess. But Roger Claude, they insist, is quite bright and in good spirits.
At 8 o'clock next morning, Easter Monday, 1990, Ludwig telephones their close friend, Denise Cousins, saying Roger Claude is dead. As the news spreads, friends and former lovers express shock and disbelief, and many immediately suspect foul play. Denise Cousins and her husband Charles are first to arrive at the house after the ambulance, and they notice something very strange.
The bedroom is unusually neat, the bed recently remade, and Roger Claude is lying on his back, tucked in with his arms by his side. Ludwig says that's exactly how he found him. And there's something else. Apart from this strangely neat room, friends say Roger Claude never slept on his back. But there's no investigation. Roger Claude's doctor issues a death certificate. The sudden mysterious death is the talk of the gay world.
Thought he might have been smothered. He thought he might have been given an overdose. Nobody really knew. The manner in which the body was so whipped away so quickly, the covert way that Gertsch was carrying on.
Ludwig later tells some of Roger Claude's friends that an autopsy shows that Roger Claude died of a heart attack. And then he tells others that it revealed stomach cancer. He's lying. In fact, there was no post-mortem. And as Roger Claude was known to be suffering from full-blown AIDS, there's no further police investigation at the time. Years later, a coroner looks into the death and finds that while there's no evidence of foul play, he's not satisfied that Roger Claude died of natural causes.
Roberts now produces the document he claims to be the last will and testament of Roger Claude Tessèdre. Ludwig is named as sole executor and official beneficiary of the bulk of the estate, officially valued at $2.7 million. Unofficially, it's believed to be closer to $8 million. That's at least $25 million at today's values. When probate is granted on the will, Ludwig and Roberts reveal that it allocates only small amounts of cash to Roger Claude's closest friends, amounts of $10,000 and $5,000, far less than the hundreds of thousands they had expected to receive. Fury erupts. A brief legal challenge is launched by one friend, but that's later dropped. For Ludwig, the mourning period is short. He's soon out on the town every night, taking drugs, drinking, dancing, and romancing. He meets and begins an affair with a young, handsome, muscular Italian labourer named Vincent Esposito. But he also begins receiving sinister phone calls and death threats.
Who is this?
Someone, somewhere, knows that Ludwig's time is running out. Friends notice he appears to be living in constant fear. His hands often shake. He begins to drink heavily and take a range of recreational drugs. He secures the Paddington mansion with bars on the windows and locked iron security grills on the doors, including the skylight and even the door to his bedroom.
What the hell's going on?
Inevitably, with all the pills and booze, his friendships begin to fall apart. It's rumoured members of the gay community see Ludwig having heated arguments with Roberts and Esposito, although this is never substantiated. Then suddenly, in October 1990, Ludwig disappears. It's the eve of the annual Sleaze Ball, a major event on the Sydney gay social calendar that Ludwig would never miss. So Ludwig's friends immediately called the police. Ken Bowditch of Paddington Police takes charge of the investigation.
We conducted all what we call the normal standard inquiries into doing canvasses, getting statements of all the last people to see him, all the places he visited. He had friends up from Melbourne, statements from them, full canvass of Oxford Street and any of the gay bars and steam rooms.
Police assemble a handful of facts. They know that Ludwig visits Vince Esposito at his apartment in the inner western suburb of Ashfield. Esposito says they argue, and Ludwig phones Brian Roberts, who lives nearby, and asks him to come and pick him up. Roberts says he drives Ludwig into the city and drops him off here in Oxford Street. Police investigations reveal no further sightings of Ludwig Gertsch.
Somewhere, sometime on this Friday night in October 1990, Ludwig Gertsch is strangled with an elastic Oki luggage strap, suffocated with a tea towel gag, and his body then wrapped in a doona cover. One neighbour at the Ashfield block of flats says she had a doona cover stolen from her clothesline. Another neighbour at the flats remembers seeing two men carrying a large roll of carpet out of the apartment block. Vince Esposito admits to removing the bedroom carpet from the flat. Does the carpet contain clues to the murder?
When Vince left the apartment, suddenly before Christmas, not long after Ludwig had disappeared, the real estate agent discovered that the carpet was missing, and Vince's story was that his children had been sick on it, so he had to move. He got rid of it, which is, bizarre in itself. But I understand that the police actually searched for the carpet and they were told it was burnt, so there was no trace of the carpet, which makes you think that there may have been something further in the carpet that, someone was trying to hide.
In November 1990, 3 weeks after Ludwig's disappearance, a bushwalker in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney comes upon his decomposing body wrapped in a doona cover sheet. Detective Ken Bowditch calls in the homicide squad, but a post-mortem provides little in the way of clues as to who committed the brutal murder.
From what the pathologist could tell us, he was strangled. There was no evidence of any other injuries other than the strangulation. There was a wedding ring, there was the sheet, of course, the Oki straps. Apart from that, very little, because the body was quite bad. It was in November the body was found and been very hot, and the body was quite badly decomposed.
After Ludwig's funeral and burial, Brian Roberts produces Ludwig's will, showing he left all his millions to Vincent Esposito. Brian Roberts is named as the sole executor. The will later proves to be a forgery. The murder investigation continues, and detectives go undercover in gay bars and bathhouses. One of the problems is that some people seem to be afraid to talk, and investigators meet what they describe as a wall of silence and fear.
I always had the feeling that, they were holding back on something, that they knew a little bit more than they could have told us. And that wasn't just a gut feeling. It was just sometimes they'd go cold if you asked them different leading questions.
Ludwig's close friend believes there is an unnamed, powerful person behind the murder, and that many people are afraid of that person.
I don't know if I'm comfortable going on record as to saying, who I believe did it. But suffice it to say that when the police did get round to actually interviewing me, that they had already come to the same conclusion that I had, but they could prove it no more than I could.
At this stage, there's no investigation into Ludwig's forged will. Probate is granted, and Roberts and Esposito now controlled the whole fortune. Over the next 2 years, under the powers granted in the will, money is withdrawn in large amounts from Ludwig's bank accounts, and all the antiques and works of art in the Paddington mansion are sold off. The house is sold, along with other properties, the last of Roger Claude's multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. Finally, with homicide detectives at a dead end, a fraud squad detective steps in to look closely at Ludwig's will. More than 2 years after the brutal killing and the dissipation of millions of dollars, the trusted solicitor Brian Barrington Roberts is arrested for forging Ludwig's will. He is charged with a total of 10 offences, including 1 count each of forging a will and uttering a forged will, and 3 counts each of making a false instrument and using a false instrument. He struck off the roll of solicitors, convicted on all charges, and sentenced to 4 years jail.
It's just greed. I see it again and again and again. This is one of the worst cases of it, where you'll do anything. You'll steal, lie. And there was so much money involved.
Both the sudden and suspicious death of the flamboyant gay millionaire Roger Claude and the subsequent brutal murder of his last lover Ludwig Gertsch remain a mystery. In 1994, a coroner's inquest finds that on the balance of probabilities, Ludwig Gertsch was murdered in the main bedroom of Vince Esposito's Ashfield apartment after 7 p.m. on Friday, October the 19th, 1990. But the coroner cannot say who was responsible, simply that on the balance of probabilities, he was strangled and smothered by a person or persons unknown. Could it have been a contract killing? In April 2004, almost 14 years later, the New South Wales Homicide Squad reopens the Ludwig Gertsch murder case, and a reward of $100,000 is offered for information. Strikeforce catalogue is formed to go over what few clues are left. They use the latest forensic technology to try to detect and examine traces of blood and DNA in the Ashfield flat. One of the men seen carrying the carpet out of the flat was wearing a ruby earring and a round, gold-faced watch with a black band. Detectives say that man could provide vital information about the killing. Police emphasise that the man with the ruby earring is not a suspect, but may have information in relation to particular people's movements at the time in question. If you think you remember a man with the ruby earring and boutique gold watch in 1990, call Crime Stoppers on 1-800-333-000. You may help detectives solve the murder of Ludwig Gertsch and perhaps even unravel the mystery of Roger Claude Tessedra's will of death.